Why was she standing there, heart racing, in front of a desk where strangers decided her future? The recruiting office smelled faintly of coffee and ink, the blinds half drawn against the Texas sun. Outside, Main Street moved as it always had, trucks rumbling, a grocery store door slamming shut, someone laughing across the street. Ordinary life. Yet here she was, Sarah Martinez, 18 years old, gripping a form that would change everything. She hadn't told anyone that morning. Not her parents, not even Jessica, the only friend she halfway trusted. The secret had burned inside her chest for months, the need to step out of the box everyone kept shoving her into. Her mother had college brochures stacked neatly on the kitchen counter. Her father had sighed quietly when those brochures went untouched. But Sarah had spent her time in a workshop out back, oil under her fingernails, and in fields where her grandfather set up tin cans and whispered lessons about patience, discipline, and grit. The recruiter looked up. Sergeant Johnson, weathered face, mustache neat, eyes sharp enough to weigh her in a single glance. He'd seen them all walk in, kids chasing dreams, kids running from something, kids who thought the uniform would fix whatever was broken at home. But Sarah wasn't fidgeting. She stood tall, knuckles tight, like she'd already made peace with the storm she was walking into. "I want to enlist," she said, her voice steady. The words shocked even her. They sounded too firm, too certain, like they came from someone older. Johnson leaned back, folding his arms. "What makes you think you're cut out for military service?" The question was simple, but Sarah felt the weight of it, like every laugh she'd endured, every sideways glance, every whisper of "you don't belong" pressed into her ribs. She thought of her grandfather, his faded medals in a wooden box, the way he said courage wasn't noise, it was endurance. She thought of the rifles he had let her practice with, the way he corrected her stance, not because she was a girl, but because accuracy didn't care who pulled the trigger. "I want to prove," Sarah answered, pausing, fighting the catch in her throat, "that I can do anything anyone else can do, and I want to serve my country while doing it." The recruiter didn't smile, but he didn't dismiss her either. He slid the forms across the desk. And just like that, the weight of her choice became real. Hours later, Sarah walked out into the fading light of her town, her name now tied to the United States Army. Her hands shook. Her stomach flipped. Yet underneath it all was a strange calm, the kind that came when there was no turning back. That night over dinner, her parents stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "You could go to college," her mother pleaded. "You have the grades, you could study anything you want." Her father said less, just looked at her with the quiet fear of a man who'd seen headlines, who knew what deployments meant. "The military is dangerous, sweetheart, and it's not exactly welcoming to young women, especially in combat roles." Sarah pushed her fork aside. She wanted to say, "I've never been welcome anywhere anyway." She wanted to say, "This isn't about what's safe." But instead she just met their eyes, calm and unflinching, because she had learned from her grandfather that arguments rarely win respect. Proof did. 3 weeks later, she was on a bus heading east. The road stretched long, Texas fading into landscapes she didn't recognize. Fields, forests, highways lined with strangers' lives. Sarah kept her gaze on the window, pretending not to hear the nervous chatter of the other recruits. Some boasted about how ready they were. Some whispered doubts into their phones before the signal died. A few sat hollow-eyed, already regretting the decision. Sarah said nothing. She let the hum of the wheels steady her heartbeat. She thought of home, her grandfather's workshop, the sound of metal tools on wood, his voice steady and sure. She thought of the smell of her mother's cooking. And she thought of the laughter that had followed her through high school halls, boys snickering when she outthrew them in gym class, girls smirking when she showed up with calloused hands instead of polished nails. She had carried that laughter for years. It no longer stung. It fueled her. Fort Moore, Georgia. The bus stopped, the doors opened, and chaos erupted. Drill sergeants stormed in, voices sharp as blades, ordering them off the bus before feet even hit the ground. Bags were yanked. Recruits stumbled. The world Sarah had known vanished in an instant. Move, move, move. Her boots hit the gravel, shouts surrounded her. Lines formed, broke, reformed, papers shoved into hands, medical checks, haircuts that erased individuality, uniforms that smelled of starch and strangers. By the time she collapsed onto a narrow bunk in a room packed with metal beds and fluorescent lights, Sarah felt like she had lived a month in a single day. Her bunkmate, Jessica from California, whispered in the dark, "Think we made a mistake." Sarah didn't answer right away. She stared at the ceiling, heart still hammering. Mistake, maybe, but also maybe not. The next morning proved it wasn't going to get easier. Trash cans banged at 4 a.m., boots hit the floor, orders barked, beds inspected, uniforms scrutinized. By sunrise, Sarah's muscles already ached. Drill Sergeant Williams circled like a hawk, his voice cutting through the air. He was especially hard on the women. Sarah saw it. He caught every minor misstep, every fraction of hesitation, and made them pay with push-ups, runs, endless repetitions. Some women cried quietly in their bunks that night, thinking no one heard. Some whispered about quitting. The men weren't subtle either. In the chow hall, Sarah heard the words meant for her. "They don't belong here. They'll slow us down. They'll fall apart when it counts." Private Thompson's voice carried sharper than the rest. "I don't know why they even let them try. When things get real, they'll just fall apart anyway." Sarah kept her head down, chewing slowly, her jaw clenched. She had been doubted all her life. Nothing new, but this time she would answer not with words, with actions. Days bled together. Long runs under heavy gear, obstacle courses that shredded skin and muscles, drills that demanded not just strength but precision. Hand-to-hand combat sessions left bruises. Team exercises tested patience. And every night, Sarah fell into her bunk aching, exhausted but more determined. She remembered her grandfather's lessons, how discomfort wasn't an enemy but a teacher. How the body always gave less than it could until the mind forced it further. And slowly she began to notice. She wasn't just keeping up, she was excelling. Her runs matched the men stride for stride. Her hands lifted what needed lifting. Her bunk passed inspections without a single correction. And when the first day of weapons training arrived, something inside her stilled, almost softened. The rifles lined up on the tables. The instructors lectured about stance, breathing, grip. Sarah listened carefully, though she had been hearing those instructions in her grandfather's voice since she was 10. When her turn came, she stepped to the line. The pistol felt heavy, different than the rifles she knew, but weight was only mechanics. The principle remained the same: steady hands, clear sight, controlled breathing, smooth trigger pull. The first shot cracked. Center target. The second shot tightened the grouping. By the time she emptied the magazine, a neat circle punctured the bull's. Silence followed. Then the crunch of boots. Drill Sergeant Williams himself leaned close to the paper target, studying it. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Looks like Martinez here actually knows which end of a weapon to hold." A ripple passed through the recruits, surprise, a few impressed glances, some glares. That night Jessica whispered in the dark, "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah smiled faintly, her mind drifting back to a dusty Texas field, tin cans lined up, her grandfather's steady voice. "My grandfather," she murmured. "He always said shooting isn't about pulling a trigger, it's about discipline, patience, respect for the weapon." Sleep pulled at her then, but before she drifted off, Sarah thought about something that clung to her chest like a secret. The others had laughed once, at the idea of her picking up a rifle. But maybe laughter was just noise. And maybe, just maybe, silence was where the real answers lived. Why did he smirk every time her name was called? Private Thompson leaned against the wall of the barracks, arms folded, whispering to two other recruits. His eyes flicked toward Sarah like she was a joke that hadn't stopped being funny. Sarah ignored it or tried to. But the sting was there, even as she tightened her boots, even as she checked her rifle sling. That morning the company assembled for another round of training, this time in small unit tactics. The air was damp, the Georgia ground soft beneath their boots. Williams barked the rules. Each squad would navigate through wooded terrain, identify targets, communicate under pressure, and secure a mock objective. It was supposed to test leadership without assigning leaders. But Thompson didn't wait for permission. "Martinez, you're on radio duty," he announced before anyone else spoke. "We'll handle the fighting." Sarah froze for a fraction of a second, heat burning her chest. He wanted her sidelined. He wanted her carrying a pack instead of firing a weapon. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Fighting him here in front of everyone would only confirm his narrative that she didn't know her place. So she nodded, clipped the radio to her gear, and let her hands hover near her rifle anyway. The march began. Thompson set the pace, fast, reckless. Sweat soaked their uniforms before the sun fully rose. 2 recruits lagged, already winded. Sarah tried to steady her breathing, tried to keep her focus forward. "Slow it down," she urged quietly. "We'll lose people at this pace." Thompson sneered. "Speed wins. First to the objective, first to win." But Sarah's gut twisted. Something about the terrain didn't feel right. Through her binoculars, she saw ridgelines too open, too exposed. She imagined an enemy watching. She imagined what her grandfather would have said. "Cover is life, Sarah. You don't win by running fast. You win by not being seen." "Thompson," she said more firmly this time, "that path leaves us exposed. We should." "Worry about your radio," he cut her off. "Leave tactics to the men." The words landed like a slap, not just at her but at every woman in the unit. A couple of the men laughed nervously, pretending they weren't listening too closely. Minutes later, the forest erupted in gunfire. Simulated rounds cracked through the air, paint pellets snapping against trees. Smoke grenades hissed. The squad dove behind weak cover, too thin, too open. Exactly what she'd warned. "Pinned." Thompson barked orders, contradictory, panicked. One recruit was tagged almost immediately, his vest lighting red. Another went down seconds later. Chaos, fear. Sarah's mind sharpened. Training fell into place. She traced the terrain, mapped the enemy positions in her head, and saw the route no one else did, a flanking path through thicker woods. "We need to pull back," she urged. "There's cover to the east. We can regroup and—" "No," Thompson roared, his voice breaking. "We push forward with me." He stood, rifle raised, and charged. 3 paint pellets slammed into his chest and helmet in less than 2 seconds. He crumpled, officially dead. Silence fell over the squad. Their self-appointed leader was gone. Sarah looked at the 2 survivors, wide-eyed, breathing hard, waiting. She lifted her radio. Pause, regroup. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying through the static. She pointed to the tree line. "Follow me." This time, no one argued. They crawled low, slipped behind the cover Thompson had ignored. The gunfire thinned, angles shifting in their favor. Sarah motioned, "Hold, wait, breathe." Then she moved, rifle braced, firing controlled shots at exposed targets. Her teammates mirrored her. Within minutes, the enemy positions were neutralized, the objective secured. The whistle blew, exercise complete. Sarah lowered her weapon, chest rising and falling with steady breath. The range controllers walked in, clipboards in hand. One raised his eyebrows. That turnaround, impressive. The 2 surviving teammates nodded quietly, still catching their breath. For once, there was no smirk, no laughter, only the silence of recognition and resentment brewing in the shadows. That night Sarah sat on her bunk, pen scratching across a letter to her grandfather. She wrote about the heat, the runs, the weapons, but she didn't write about Thompson. She didn't write about the sting of being dismissed. Some things, she thought, would only weigh him down. Jessica slid onto the bunk beside her. Words going around. They said you saved the mission. Sarah shrugged. It wasn't just me. Jessica tilted her head. But it was you, wasn't it? You saw what no one else did. Sarah folded the paper carefully, sealing it away. She didn't answer. But inside a thought echoed. If skill speaks, why do they refuse to listen? The days that followed only sharpened the edges. Her shooting scores near perfect, her endurance unmatched, her inspections flawless. And yet whispers followed her everywhere. She's getting lucky. The instructors are going easy on her. Anyone can hit paper targets. Thompson's voice carried the loudest. Even after his humiliation, he doubled down. She's just a show pony. Let's see her in a real fight. It ate at her. Not because she needed their approval, but because she had believed, foolishly, maybe, that proving herself would silence doubt. Instead, proof seemed to fuel it. The final straw came one evening in the chow hall. She had just sat down when she heard it. She's probably sleeping with the instructors. Laughter, snickers. Her fork froze midair. Heat spread up her neck into her face. She turned slowly, her eyes finding Thompson, his smirk, his satisfaction. She didn't say a word, didn't rise to it, but something inside her shifted. Not anger alone, resolve. Later, behind the barracks, she tilted her head back to the stars. Jessica found her there. Don't listen to them, Jessica whispered. Sarah's jaw clenched. What if they believe it? What if everything I do gets reduced to that? Then you keep proving them wrong, Jessica said simply, over and over, until the truth's too heavy to ignore. Sarah nodded, silent. The next morning, the company assembled for the final marksmanship test of basic training. The toughest evaluation yet. Close-range rapid fire, long-range precision, moving targets under simulated combat, scores that would follow them for the rest of their careers. Sarah stood at the line, rifle in hand. The weight was familiar. The noise, the chaos, the pressure, it all fell away. She thought of the laughter, she thought of the whispers, she thought of her grandfather's voice, discipline, patience, respect for the weapon. The first shot cracked. And she did not miss. Why was the range so quiet when she stepped forward? Dozens of recruits lined the firing line, rifles slung, helmets low. The instructors barked orders, but beneath it all was a hush, the kind that only comes when everyone is waiting to see if someone will fail. Sarah knew it. She could feel it in the eyes on her back. The final marksmanship test wasn't just another drill. It would etch scores into permanent records. It would open or close doors to specialized training. It would linger in files long after basic was over. And for Sarah, it was more than a test. It was the answer to weeks of whispers. Thompson's voice carried even before her turn. Paper targets don't shoot back, he muttered to no one in particular, but loud enough for everyone. Let's see how Golden Girl handles this one. Sarah adjusted her stance, steadying her breath. She refused to give him the satisfaction of a glance. The first phase, rapid fire at close range. Targets popped up, mechanical silhouettes painted in black. She raised her rifle, sights snapping into place. Crack, crack, crack. Each shot a rhythm, each hit clustered tight around center mass. Her magazine emptied. The target fell. She lowered her weapon, breath steady. No cheers, no murmurs, just that heavy silence again. The second phase, long-range precision. Targets pushed back. Wind teased the edges of the flags. Sunlight caught the dust. Sarah adjusted her sights, fingers calm. She slowed her breathing, each inhale and exhale measured. The world narrowed. One eye closed, one sight picture, one squeeze. The steel plate clanged, a bullseye at 600 meters. She reloaded, fired again, another hit, again, each shot folding neatly into the last. One of the instructors leaned closer, as if disbelieving what he was seeing. By the time she finished, her grouping looked like a single whole. The third phase, moving targets, combat simulation. Smoke machines belched haze across the range. Loudspeakers blasted chaos, shouting, explosions, the sound of a battlefield compressed into static and echoes. Targets darted out, vanished, reappeared at odd angles. Sarah's pulse quickened. Sweat traced her temple. She could hear her grandfather's voice again, low and steady. Block it all out. Trust your breath. Trust your trigger. Crack. Target down. Crack. Another fell. She tracked them like shadows, like ghosts. Her rifle became an extension of her breath, her hands, her will. Not hurried, not desperate, just precise. When the last target dropped, the smoke still curling through the range, she lowered her weapon. Her chest rose and fell, controlled, quiet. And then nothing. No applause, no words, just officers bent over clipboards, pens scratching. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, one instructor raised his head. Results are in. The numbers were read out loud, names called, scores given. Some recruits winced. Others let out small sighs of relief. Then Martinez, perfect score. The silence broke, not with applause but with disbelief. A ripple passed through the line. Heads turned, jaws slackened. Even the range officers double-checked their tallies. Perfect, not near perfect, not impressive, perfect. Thompson's smirk faltered. Drill Sergeant Williams walked toward her, boots crunching on gravel. His face unreadable, his voice still booming. Martinez, he said, in 20 years of training recruits, I've only seen a handful of perfect scores on this test. Most of them had prior military experience or specialized training before they came here. You just set a new standard. And you did it with half this company hopping, you'd fall flat on your face. He paused, letting the words hang. That tells me something about your character, something worth more than just aim. The weight of his words landed heavier than the score itself. But Sarah didn't smile. She didn't glow. She just nodded, throat tight, because she knew better than to believe this would silence anyone. That night the barracks buzzed. Some recruits congratulated her openly, genuine admiration in their eyes. Jessica clapped her on the shoulder, whispering, "You did it. You shut them all up." But not everyone was silent. Thompson sat hunched with his circle, voices low but venomous. Sarah caught fragments, rigged, special treatment, no way she's that good. By lights out, the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Sarah sat at her bunk, carefully cleaning her rifle, trying to drown out the mutters. Until she heard it. She's probably sleeping with the instructors. The words cut sharper than any blade. Her hands froze, oil smeared across her rag. She looked up, Thompson's grin, the laughter around him. The room went quiet when she stood, slowly, calmly, letter in her hand forgotten, her voice steady but edged like steel. "You know what your problem is, Thompson," she said, her words slicing through the silence. "You can't accept that someone you decided was beneath you is actually better. Instead of improving yourself, you'd rather tear down anyone who makes you look weak." Gasps, the barracks shifted, recruits leaning closer. Thompson's jaw clenched. "I don't have to listen to some girl who thinks she's hot stuff." "You're right," Sarah said evenly. "You don't, but you do have to face facts. I earned every point the same way everyone else did. Same range, same rifle, same pressure. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe ask yourself why." The silence was broken not by Thompson, but by the sudden thunder of boots. Drill Sergeant Williams filled the doorway, eyes scanning, presence heavy. "What's all this noise?" His tone cut every whisper short. Thompson stiffened. "Nothing, Drill Sergeant, just discussion." Williams' gaze shifted, pinning Sarah. Martinez stepped forward. Her heart hammered as she obeyed, braced for reprimand. Instead, Williams' voice rose, carrying to every corner of the barracks. "Martinez, command has fast-tracked your application. You'll be shipping to Fort Benning next week for advanced sniper training. Congratulations, soldier." The announcement hit the room like thunder. Sniper school, Even seasoned soldiers struggled to get in. Acceptance straight from basic, almost unheard of. Williams turned, leaving as abruptly as he'd entered. Silence remained, but it was no longer disbelief. It was shock. Sarah stood still, hands trembling slightly, the weight of the words settling into her chest. Sniper school. Not a dream, not a possibility, a reality. As she returned to her bunk, she caught Thompson's stare. No smirk now, just something else. Anger, resentment, maybe fear. Jessica leaned close, whispering with wide eyes, "Sarah, you're going to be a sniper." Sarah didn't answer, not because she didn't believe it, but because she knew this was only the beginning. And beginnings were never easy. Why did the barracks feel different the next morning? Sarah woke before reveille, the room still cloaked in shadows. She sat on the edge of her bunk, lacing her boots slowly, hearing the faint stir of breathing around her. But the silence wasn't the same as it had been yesterday. Yesterday she had been another recruit. Today she was something else. Sniper school. The words carried through the barracks like contraband, whispered, repeated, disbelieved, then begrudgingly accepted. Some approached her with awe. "Congrats, Martinez, that's huge." Some with envy. "Must be nice skipping the line." And some with nothing but cold stares. Thompson didn't speak at all, but his silence was louder than his smirks had ever been. The days that followed blurred. Marches, drills, classroom sessions, all felt muted, as if the announcement had pulled her into a different orbit. Instructors who had once barked at her now nodded curtly, their eyes measuring her in a new way. But with recognition came weight. Captain Rodriguez summoned her 3 days later. His office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Files were stacked in precise rows. He didn't waste time. "Martinez," he said, motioning for her to sit. His voice was steady, not unkind, but edged with gravity. "Do you know what sniper school means?" "Yes, sir," she answered. But even as she said it, she felt the truth. She didn't, not fully. Rodriguez leaned forward. "It means one of the highest washout rates in the Army. It means grueling physical demands, constant mental pressure, standards that break even seasoned soldiers. It means weeks where you'll question whether you even belong in uniform." Sarah held his gaze, forcing her jaw to stay unclenched. "But it also means something else," Rodriguez continued. "It means visibility. You're not just carrying your own hopes. You're carrying the hopes of every young woman who thinks the door is closed to her. If you succeed, you open it wider. If you fail—" He let the silence finish the thought. Sarah swallowed hard. The responsibility pressed into her chest, heavier than any rucksack, but she didn't flinch. "I'm ready for the challenge, sir," she said quietly. Rodriguez studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "I believe you are, but belief isn't enough. Preparation is. Discipline is. Remember that." When she left his office, the sunlight outside felt harsher than before. That night, Jessica helped her fold her uniforms into neat stacks, slipping letters and keepsakes between them. "I can't believe you're really going," Jessica said, her voice a mix of pride and sadness. "Sniper school, Martinez, that's insane." Sarah smiled faintly. "You've improved so much. You could apply for advanced training too." Jessica shook her head. "I'm good enough to be a solid soldier, but not like you." She paused, lowering her voice. "Not exceptional." "Exceptional doesn't matter," Sarah replied. "What matters is showing up every day, doing your part. Not everyone has to be the best." Jessica nodded, but her eyes shone in the dim light. Later, as Sarah lay in her bunk, she listened to the murmur of voices in the dark. She thought of her grandfather, the weight of his lessons, the way he had taught her not to quit when others laughed. She thought of her parents, who still didn't understand but would one day. And she thought of the moment she first picked up the rifle, the moment laughter turned into silence. The last week of basic was a blur of final tests, farewells, and quiet reflection. But the tension lingered, sharp as wire. On the morning of her departure, Sarah carried her duffel to the transport vehicle. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the sky in pale gold. She lifted the bag, muscles straining, mind focused on the road ahead. Then she heard footsteps. "Thompson!" She braced, expecting another jab, another mutter designed to undercut her. Instead, his expression was different. His jaw worked like he was forcing words through clenched teeth. "Martinez," he said, stopping a few feet away. His voice was rough but quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I owe you an apology." Sarah blinked, genuinely surprised. "I was wrong about you," Thompson continued, struggling with each syllable. "I let my own insecurities turn me into someone I'm not proud of. You earned everything you achieved here, and I should have seen that sooner." Sarah studied his face, searching for mockery, for hidden smirks, but all she found was something raw: regret. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "We all have things to learn about ourselves." He nodded, shoulders easing slightly. Then he extended his hand. "Good luck at sniper school. Make us proud." Sarah hesitated only a moment before shaking it. His grip was firm, steady. For the first time, it wasn't a contest. It was respect. She turned, climbing onto the transport. The engine rumbled to life, the barracks shrinking behind her. She settled into the seat, duffel at her feet, heart pounding with the weight of what lay ahead. Sniper school. The bus rolled forward, Georgia countryside flashing by. She thought of everything behind her, the doubts, the whispers, the laughter. And everything ahead, the grueling tests, the unforgiving standards, the chance to prove not just to others but to herself that she belonged. She looked down at her hands, calloused, steady. The same hands that once held tin cans on fence posts. The same hands that had defied smirks at the firing line. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, words that felt less like hope and more like a vow. "I belong here." And for the first time, she didn't just believe it, she knew it. Why did Fort Benning feel less like a base and more like a gauntlet? The transport bus groaned to a stop, air brakes hissing. Sarah stepped down into the humid Georgia morning. The air felt heavier here, as if the ground itself pressed harder on those who dared walk it. Sniper school wasn't basic. It wasn't about survival in a crowd. It was about exposure. Here, there would be no place to hide. The instructors made that clear from the first second. "You think you're special because you got this far," one barked, packing the line of recruits. His face was carved from stone, voice sharp enough to cut bone. "You're not. You're all nothing until you prove otherwise. Most of you will wash out. Some of you will break. And a few of you maybe will graduate." Sarah kept her chin up, eyes forward. She had heard threats before, but something about the man's tone sank deeper. This wasn't bravado, it was certainty. The first week shattered illusions. Endurance marches under crushing loads. Obstacle courses built to break bodies, not test them. Rifle drills that punish the smallest misstep. Every failure meant repetition. Every repetition meant pain. By the third night, blisters painted her feet raw. Muscles screamed. Her body begged for rest, but rest was rationed like air, too little, too fleeting. And then came the field exercise. The recruits were dropped in thick woods, each given a map, compass, and coordinates. Find the point. Stay hidden. Move unseen. Anyone spotted failed. Sarah pressed low against the earth, crawling through mud that clung like hands. Her heartbeat thundered. Every branch seemed too loud, every breath too sharp. She remembered her grandfather's voice. "The rifle isn't your weapon. Silence is. Stillness is." So she slowed. She moved inches at a time, letting the forest swallow her. Hours passed. The sun shifted. Insects bit. Her uniform was soaked through. She ignored it, focused only on distance, cover, the rhythm of her breath. When she finally reached the point, she stayed low, waited, scanning for instructors who hunted for mistakes. A whistle blew, exercise complete. She hadn't been spotted. But when the scores were tallied that night, half the recruits had. Their faces were blank, masks hiding shame as they packed their gear. Washouts. Sarah watched them go, unease coiling in her chest. She wasn't better than them, not stronger, not faster, just lucky this time. The doubt followed her into the next phase. Marksmanship. Here the standards weren't just high, they were merciless. Targets at extreme ranges. Variables shifting constantly, wind, light, elevation. Shots measured not in feet but in fractions of inches. The instructors gave no encouragement. Only numbers: hit, misadjust, fail. Sarah gripped her rifle, breath slow. The weapon felt familiar yet foreign. The stakes were different here. At basic, hitting a target meant competence. Here it meant survival. Her first shot landed wide, too wide. Her stomach clenched. The instructor marked the score without expression. Again. She adjusted, focused, breathed, fired. Closer, but not enough. Her chest tightened. Sweat slid down her back. Around her, other recruits fired, cursed, adjusted, cursed again. Sarah's hands trembled. Doubt bled through discipline. What if they were right? What if I don't belong here? She thought of Thompson's smirk, of the whispers, of the accusation that she was just a show pony. Her vision blurred, the target dissolving into haze. And then memory. Her grandfather's workshop, the smell of oil and dust, his hand steadying hers, his voice low, patient. You don't chase the shot, you invite it. The bullet goes where calm lives. Sarah closed her eyes, exhaled, opened them again. The target sharpened. She squeezed. The shot rang true, center hit. The instructor nodded faintly, marking the score. Better again. Hour after hour she fired, adjusted, fired again. Each round carving away at doubt, not erasing it, never erasing it, but pushing it back shot by shot. By sunset her scores had climbed, not perfect, not flawless, but enough. When they returned to barracks, Sarah collapsed onto her cot, exhaustion burying her. Jessica wasn't here to whisper encouragement. No familiar faces, only strangers, each one determined to outlast the others. For the first time since enlisting, Sarah felt alone. But alone wasn't the same as broken. The next morning they were woken at 300, night navigation, find the targets, take the shots, no excuses. Sarah crawled into position under cover of darkness. The forest was alive with sound, owls, insects, the distant rustle of others moving clumsily. She raised her rifle, peered through the scope. A faint silhouette emerged against the starlit horizon. Her breath slowed, her body melted into the ground. Crack! The steel rang. She adjusted, found another. Crack! Another hit. For a fleeting moment pride bloomed, but then came the instructor's voice, cold, cutting. You hit your targets, but you moved too fast. In the field, haste gets you killed, remember that. Sarah nodded, jaw tight. Success here was never whole. There was always another flaw, always another step. By the end of the week, recruits were disappearing daily. Injuries, failures, quits. Sarah stayed. But the cost was rising. Blisters tore open. Sleep deprivation blurred her thoughts. Her hands ached from gripping her rifle. Her eyes burned from endless scope time. One night, lying on the cold floor of a training shelter, she stared at the ceiling beams. Her chest felt hollow. Her mind whispered the words she hated most. Maybe I can't do this. The thought scared her more than any drill sergeant. But then she remembered Thompson, standing by the transport, eyes unguarded, voice rough as he admitted he was wrong. She remembered Jessica's faith. She remembered Rodriguez's warning that she carried more than herself. She turned onto her side, clutching the rifle against her chest like an anchor. And in the silence she made a promise. I will not be the one who quits. Why did the silence feel heavier than gunfire? The recruits lay prone in a field of tall grass, their rifles trained on distant targets that barely showed above the horizon. The sun beat down mercilessly, sweat stinging eyes, bugs crawling across exposed skin. They weren't allowed to swat them away. Any sudden movement meant disqualification. The test wasn't about hitting the target, it was about not being seen. Sarah's cheek pressed against the stock of her rifle, the world narrowed to the scope's small circle. Every muscle screamed to move, but she stayed still, breath measured, eyes locked on the shimmer of distance. Minutes turned to hours. Instructors stalked the field, binoculars in hand, searching for the twitch of a finger, the flare of sunlight on metal, the slip of discipline. One by one, whistles blew. Recruits were pulled out. Exposed, out. Moved too much, out. Scope glare, out. Sarah's chest tightened. Each whistle was a reminder of how thin the line was. Her own mistake came near sundown. She shifted her elbow just an inch, too fast, too sharp. Freeze! An instructor's voice cracked the air. Sarah's blood turned to ice. He crouched beside her, eyes like knives. Thought I wouldn't see that. 1 inch is all it takes to get you killed. Do it again and you're gone. Do you understand? Yes, Sergeant, she whispered. He leaned closer, voice low enough that only she could hear. You don't belong here. Go back to whatever corner of the army actually wants you. Her throat tightened. She bit her tongue, refusing to answer, refusing to let him hear the break in her voice. He straightened, walked on. The doubt returned that night, sharper than ever. She sat on the edge of her cot, hands trembling, staring at the floorboards. For the first time, she wondered if they weren't just trying to weed out the weak. Maybe they were trying to weed out her. What if they really don't want me here? The next phase was worse. Psychological pressure. Isolation chambers. Hours with no sound but the hum of fluorescent lights. Then sudden shouts, blinding lights, bursts of chaos. Sleep deprivation layered on top until reality blurred at the edges. In one drill, Sarah was marched into a dark room, handed a rifle, and told to set up for a shot. A target flashed into view for less than 2 seconds, then gone. Too slow, the instructor barked. Another target, too far left. Miss. Her chest ached, her hands shook. Target after target flashed and vanished, each failure grinding deeper into her bones. Finally, her rifle lowered, barrel drooping. She heard Thompson's voice in her head again. Paper targets don't shoot back. Her chest tightened, breath shallow. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the rifle down. Instead, she forced herself to whisper, barely audible, patience, discipline, respect. Her grandfather's words. She lifted the rifle again. This time she didn't chase the targets. She waited. One appeared brief, fleeting. She was ready, crack, hit. Another crack. Her rhythm returned. The misses slowed, the hits grew. The instructor didn't praise her, just grunted, scribbled on his clipboard and barked for the next recruit. But Sarah knew she had clawed her way back from the edge of quitting. The nights were the hardest. Recruits slept in shifts, always on edge. Some broke down quietly, silent tears soaking their pillows. Others walked away, muttering they'd had enough. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, exhaustion pulling at her bones. She thought of her parents, of the disbelief in her mother's eyes. She thought of Rodriguez's warning that she carried more than just herself. She thought of her grandfather, his voice steady, his faith quiet. But she also thought of Thompson's unexpected apology. Maybe you really did earn this, he had said, words he hadn't been able to choke out before. That memory steadied her. The next morning they were loaded into trucks, driven miles into dense woods and dropped with one order. Stalk your targets. Engage unseen. Don't come back until the job done. It was the ultimate test. Crawling miles under cover, staying hidden, finding firing positions, and taking shots without being spotted. Sarah dropped low into the mud, rifle across her arms, and began the slow crawl forward. Insects bit at her neck, rocks cut into her knees, sweat blurred her vision, but she moved inch by inch, letting the earth swallow her. Hours passed, she barely breathed. When the target came into view, a mannequin dressed as an officer, flanked by spotters, she steadied her scope. Her finger found the trigger. Crack! The round hit, the mannequin dropped. Her chest swelled with relief. But then came the whistle. Martinez spotted out. Her blood froze. She turned her head slowly. One of the instructors stood just 50 yards away, binoculars lowered, his expression unreadable. "You made the shot," he said flatly, "but you exposed yourself, that's failure." Sarah's throat closed. Back at camp, she sat on her cot, staring at the ground, the word echoing through her skull. Failure. All the whispers returned at once. Lucky, doesn't belong, show pony, special treatment. She clenched her fists until her nails dug into her palms. For the first time, she thought seriously about quitting, about walking away before the humiliation grew deeper. But then out of nowhere, Jessica's voice echoed in her memory, soft, steady. "Then you just keep proving them wrong, over and over, until the truth's too heavy to ignore." Sarah inhaled, shaky, painful but real. She lifted her rifle again, running her hand along the stock, grounding herself. She wasn't out yet. The instructors hadn't sent her home. They hadn't cut her orders. Failure wasn't the end, unless she let it be. She whispered into the empty barracks, the words of vow carved in stone. "I will not quit." Why did the forest feel like it was holding its breath? Sarah lay flat in the mud, face pressed against damp earth, rifle steady against her shoulder. The world narrowed to the thicket in front of her, branches, shadows, shifting patches of light. Somewhere out there, instructors scanned with binoculars, waiting for the slightest movement. The stalk test, again her second chance, her last chance. She couldn't afford another failure. Her chest rose and fell with quiet, measured breaths. Every muscle screamed, every nerve wanted to twitch, but she forced herself into stillness. Patience, discipline, respect. The words pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat. She inched forward, centimeter by centimeter, letting the grass conceal her. Her hands were numb, mud clinging to her fingers. Sweat dripped down her temples, caught in her collar, soaked her uniform until it stuck to her skin. She ignored all of it. An hour passed, too. The sun shifted overhead. Her eyes burned, but she didn't blink. Through her scope, she finally saw it. The target. The mannequin officer, standing near a mock command post, flanked by two instructors who scanned the tree line with binoculars. She froze. Every instinct screamed to take the shot now before fatigue betrayed her. But instinct wasn't enough. She knew what had cost her last time: haste. She remembered the sting of failure, the word ringing in her ears like a sentence. She remembered the way she almost quit. Not again. She lowered her cheek against the stock, steadying her breath until her heartbeat slowed. She waited, 10 minutes, 15. The instructors scanned, eyes raking the brush, but she was still just another shadow among shadows. Finally, when their gaze swept past, she aligned her scope. Her finger found the trigger. Crack! The mannequin dropped. For a moment, silence, then another whistle, sharp, cutting. Her blood froze. Had she failed again? "Shooter identify," an instructor barked. Sarah's throat tightened. She forced her voice low, calm. "Martinez, 2 o'clock, 200 yards." The binoculars swung back. The instructor's face shifted. No smirk, no triumph, just surprise. "You weren't spotted," he said flatly. Relief crashed through her like a tide, but she didn't move. Not yet, not until ordered. "Good stalk," he added grudgingly. Sarah lowered her rifle, rolling onto her back, the sky spinning above her. Her muscles shook from the effort of stillness. But in that trembling she felt something new. Not just survival, not just relief, pride. When they returned to camp, Whispers followed her again, but they were different this time. Did you hear she passed? They couldn't even find her. Maybe she really does belong here. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it wasn't dismissal either. That night, lying on her cot, Sarah stared at the rafters, exhaustion weighing her down. But inside, a small fire burned steady. She had been broken, almost quit, but she hadn't. The days that followed built on that victory. Endless drills, calculations under pressure, adjusting for wind, humidity, distance, memorizing terrain until it was etched into her bones. Sarah's scores crept higher. Her confidence steadied, not loud, not boastful, just quiet, consistent. But sniper school wasn't finished with her. The final test loomed, a full mission simulation. Teams were given coordinates, ordered to infiltrate hostile terrain, set up firing positions, and engage multiple targets under strict time limits. Sarah's team was paired with 2 other recruits, both older, both skeptical of her. They didn't say it outright, but she saw it in their eyes, the doubt, the unspoken calculation that she might drag them down. When the exercise began, they moved quickly through the woods, using cover, hand signals, silence. But halfway through, one recruit stumbled, snapping a branch loud enough to echo. An instructor's voice boomed through a loudspeaker, compromised. Simulated enemy fire erupted. The team dove for cover, pinned behind a fallen log. Panic flickered in the recruits' eyes. One shouted, "We have to move." But Sarah shook her head. "If we move now, they'll spot us again. We wait. We let them think we're gone." They hesitated. "Trust me," she whispered. The seconds crawled. The simulated fire slowed, then stopped. Sarah led them in a low crawl, flanking wide through thick brush. She found a ridge, sighted down, and spotted the enemy positions. Her teammates set up, rifles steady. She inhaled, exhaled, fired. Crack, crack, crack. Targets fell, the field went quiet. The whistle blew, exercise complete. Back at camp, the instructors read scores aloud. Sarah's team had finished with near-perfect marks. One of her teammates glanced at her, hesitation flickering into something else. Respect. It was small, quiet, but real. That night, Sarah lay awake, the sounds of the camp around her. She thought of her grandfather, of how he told her that dignity wasn't about words. It was about what you did when no one believed you could. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she belonged. Why did the parade ground feel heavier than any battlefield? The recruits stood in formation, boots aligned, rifles polished. Their uniforms were pressed, but their faces told the truth, drawn, exhausted, eyes hollowed by weeks of strain. Few remained. More than half had washed out, vanished in silence, names scratched from rosters as if they'd never been here. But Sarah was still standing. She felt the weight of it in her bones. The blisters, the bruises, the nights she nearly quit, all of it pressed into this moment. The commander walked the line, his steps slow, deliberate. He paused before each graduate, pinning on the insignia that marked them as something rare. Snipers. When he reached Sarah, he studied her with sharp, measured eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought he might pass her by, that some hidden flaw would disqualify her at the last second. Instead, he pinned the insignia to her uniform, his voice steady but carrying. "Martinez," he said, "you've set a standard here. Don't forget what it cost to earn it." She saluted, jaw tight, throat burning. The ceremony ended with no cheers, no applause, just silence. Because here, respect wasn't loud. It was weight carried in the eyes of those who knew what it had taken. That night, alone in her bunk, Sarah opened the small wooden box she kept at the bottom of her duffel. Inside were letters she'd never sent, scraps written to her grandfather, to Jessica, to herself. Words she hadn't spoken aloud. She unfolded one, her handwriting shaky from exhaustion. "I thought I would break today. I thought they would see the truth that I don't belong here. But then I remembered what you said. That dignity doesn't argue, it proves. I don't know if I'll pass, but I won't quit." She set the letter aside, tears burning at the corners of her eyes, not because of the pain she had endured, but because she had endured it at all. Weeks later, she stood on a range again, this time not as a trainee but as a sniper. The rifle in her hands felt different now, not heavier, not lighter, just hers. The instructor called out distances, conditions, targets. She adjusted, fired, adjusted again. Each shot a reminder of laughter in high school hallways, of whispers in barracks, of Thompson's sneer. But also of Jessica's quiet faith, of Rodriguez's warning, of her grandfather's voice, calm and steady. Every shot landed. The instructors didn't clap, they didn't congratulate, they just nodded, because that was enough. Later, walking back alone, Sarah passed a group of new recruits just arriving. They looked younger, wide-eyed, nervous. One of them, a young woman, glanced at Sarah, her eyes flicking to the sniper insignia on her uniform. In that look, Sarah saw something she hadn't expected. Not doubt, not dismissal, hope. She kept walking, but inside, something shifted. This was no longer just about proving herself. It was about leaving a path, about being the quiet evidence that others could follow. That evening, Sarah wrote one last letter, this one to herself. They laughed when you picked up the rifle. They doubted when you pulled the trigger. They whispered when you shot them all. But the rifle wasn't your answer, it was your voice. And now it's your responsibility. She folded it carefully, tucking it into the box. As lights out echoed through the barracks, Sarah lay back, eyes closing. The doubts hadn't vanished. They never would. But she no longer needed them gone. She needed them there as reminders of what she had overcome. Outside, the night was quiet. And in that quiet, Sarah understood what her grandfather had meant all along. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.